This is Laborc, and it is so nice to have you here. These are the paints you need. Cover the pants and the lower half of the torso with Night Lord's Blue with a base layer consistency. You guys can see that the mask is already painted. If you'd like to see how I did that part, you can access to that content on my Patreon page. I'm using the Kickstarter painted version of the miniature as reference, painted by Seb Lavigne. With the same mixture I used before, I start to work on the pants and some tentacles on his hat. These head tentacles are really up to you which section you'd like to paint to a certain color. We are using thin layers again and leave black the dark recesses of the folds that are facing down. After that, use warpfiend gray and sketch out the highlight areas. This will create a quite desaturated highlight, but that's okay. We are in a dark, cold dungeon. If you want something colorful, use some saturated blue and then add some yellow to the mixture. That will create teal, turquoise if you add more and more yellow, but it can look just as good. With these desaturated colors that we used on the mask as well, our paint job will be more integrated. The highlight references for the Jester can be downloaded from the Patreon link. If you are not a Patreon, you can be one for only €2 a month and access to some exclusive content as well. For the hat, let's use Word Bearer's Red, leaving only the extreme shadows black. I'm using thin layers again, so I don't really need to blend this new layer with the black parts. Paint the hat, gloves and his overshirt's upper part. Use the highlight reference picture to see where to leave the most black parts. Papa Laborc uses evil sunz scarlet to sketch the highlights on the red cloth parts. Remember that the light is coming from the top and a little bit from the left. Paint around 70% of the previous layer with this color, but be careful not to over highlight and get rid of the previous layer completely, because I will slap on your tiny hand. And you will cry. There. That's what you really wanted? To push the values, let's use Wild Rider Red by covering 50% of the previous layer. Paint all those little rings on the tentacles where they are sewed together. This will act as an edge highlight and will make them more defined and crispy. To blend in this layer, just dilute your paint to a glaze consistency and follow the same process we did with the second step on the mask. Move the glaze from the dark to the brighter layer and make sure to wait for the layers to dry completely before applying the next one. This is crucial. Now add some sunny skin tone to the Wild Rider Red and cover 50% of our previous Wild Rider Red layer. Go back to those rings, like in the previous step, and create some highlights on the top part of those rings. Same things applies to the fingers, but watch out to only apply this where the folds on the fingers are facing upward. For the yellow and gold parts, we use Deathworld forest with a little bit of cavalry brown. This green foundation will be an interesting starting point for our gold. On the back, leave a bigger part black on his overshirt's binding. This way we can indicate the darkest part of the miniature. On the rattles, covering everything with this color, only leave a little bit of darker area between the rattle and the golden ring where it's attached to the tentacles. After that, let's use gold brown. On the rattles, try to follow the shape with the highlight placement, so create circular shaped highlights. On the back of the overshirt, try to make more separated sections and follow the folds. If you use thin layers, it will blend easily with our previous color. Blending involves using a series of gradual and controlled brush strokes to soften the edges between the colors and create a smooth, natural looking gradient. For the brightest highlights, I used ice yellow to imitate the glint on the metallic surface on the rattles. I used a thicker consistency for the rattles and a much thinner one for the overshirt. I like to have a little bit less contrast on the cloth fabric, and with less opacity we can achieve that easily. Later Papa Laborc thought he needed a bit more contrast on the pants and on the forearms, so I added some ice yellow to the warpfiend grey. I went back to some folds and pushed the values just a little bit. The first layer on the loot is burnt red, and I only left the bigger recesses black. After that, I used a mix of cavalry brown and gold brown and used a thin consistency to paint the wood grain. Painting wood texture and wood grain on miniatures can be challenging, but it can add a lot of visual interest and depth to your models. You just have to create thin lines over the surface and try to leave a little bit of separation between them. It's very important that the darker layer show through between these lines to create the effect. Add a little bit more gold brown to the mix and follow the previous lines, but only repaint half of them to increase the contrast. For the strings, I used a mix of black and warpfiend grey. Use the side of your brush to avoid the paint flow into the recesses between the strings. So just slide the brush on the strings without adding any extra pressure, and your paint consistency can't be too runny for that. To highlight them, add some ivory to the warpfiend grey and reduce the highlight area towards the center. For the patches on his pants, I used Werber's red again. Then I highlighted them with Evil Sun Scarlet, leaving a little bit of Werber's red between to imitate some extra folds, but a simple gradient could work just as well on these smaller patches. After that, I used the same colors as for the hat, so I reduced the highlight areas with Wild Rider red using thin layers. Then I went in with the Wild Rider red and sunny skin tone mix to push the contrast and painting the laces around the patches using black and warpfiend grey mixed with ivory. They are pretty small, so I couldn't record it, but I'm sure you guys can manage to do that. Just highlight the laces towards the section where they connect to the patches. And there you go guys, the Jester is done and ready for the campaign. So thank you for joining me on this little painting adventure. A huge thanks to my Patreons who support this kind of videos. With special shout out to Jonathan Rhodes, Cold Blooded Dom, Trying to Paint Minis, Jonathan Mosner, Rulzak, Vlad D, Earthapple21, One Sharp Joe Crafts, Richard Piet, Glitchy Macrash. If you like to support Papa Laborc, you can do that on Patreon, where you will have early access to these videos and you can vote on the next mini. Or if you need a little bit of extra help, online coaching is also available. And there are only one spot left for online coaching. I hope the rest of your day will be as smooth as a granny's butt cheek.